Hi everyone, join me today as we paint this poinsettia in watercolor. Supplies for today: I've got a pencil and eraser, a palette of paints, a palette for mixing, water, tissue paper for blotting, and although I'll be using an array of brushes, I think the most important brushes are going to be around about a size 4 round and something for more detailed work, so maybe a size 0 or 1 brush. If you've got a larger size 8, 10 or 12 or a mop brush to put down large amounts of water, you can use that. And then I just have a spare sized 4 round brush as well. The paper I'm using today is Baohong 100% cotton paper. It's cold pressed, 300 GSM or 140 pound. I buy this on a roll and then I cut it to size. It's about an A4 size. If you would like to do the bokeh effect in the background, as I do, I will be using this pack of circle stencils and a magic eraser sponge that I have cut up. I'm going to start with my pencil sketch already on the page. You can find the link to the free traceable sketch reference in the description box below. This tutorial and all of its sketches and pictures of the final sketch can be found on my Patreon channel. You can join as a free member and have access to all of these references and video. I'm just using a kneaded eraser to remove the excess graphite off my sketch and just to lighten up some of the lines a little bit. I'm going to start by doing a very light wash over all of the red leaves that are in my sketch. This is just going to be a very basic light glazing layer at the beginning. I'm going to prepare 2 colors for this glazing layer, and that's going to be very light washes of Rose Madder Permanent and Alizarin Crimson. I'm going to start by putting water down on the red leaves. Just make sure that as you do this, that you only put water down where the red leaves are, so just be quite aware of where the green leaves are so that you don't put water down at the same time. I'm using my larger round number 8 brush here to get the water down, just so that I can get as big a spread as I can as quickly as possible. Now I'm going to prepare the Rose Madder Permanent first. I'm really going to make a very, very watery mix of it. It's going to be a very light glazing layer. And I'm just going to dot this throughout the leaves, particularly in the middle between the veins, because those areas will be lighter, and I will go with the more redder color by the veins. We really want to go really light with our color in this first glazing layer. Otherwise, when it comes to additional layers and in doing our shadows, if we've gone too dark in our initial layers, there's simply going to be nowhere to go with regards to trying to build some contrast and to put in some shadow colors later on. So this is really just to tint the leaves in the lightest of colors. The water has pulled towards the tip of that leaf quite a lot. I'm just pushing it backwards so that it doesn't all pool at the tip. I'm just going to pick that up a little bit. There's too much water on the page, and here I've gone out the lines a little bit. Even though I'm going to go over underneath with green, which is darker, I'm just going to lift it anyway. And now I'm going to prepare some Alizarin Crimson, and I'm going to dot that in around the leaves as well, really sort of towards the middle, or towards the veins. I'm going to drop that in. It's quite a concentrated color, as you can see, and it activates really easily in the palette, so I must make sure that I don't take too much. But I like how I'm getting here that along the veins I'm getting it darker, and then in between it's staying lighter. I'm also going to pick up at the tip here. There's quite a lot of pooling there. I'm not going to put any Alizarin Crimson down there yet, otherwise it's just going to spread too far. I'll come back to that area. So this this is really just a very fun layer with no stress. We're just putting some basic glazing down, and then we'll come back and do leaf by leaf in an additional layer. We're just mapping out really where the red leaves are going to be. This layer is very wet now, so when I'm finished I'm going to make sure that I let it dry completely before I come in and do any additional layer. Alright, so I'm not going to overwork it here. I want to maintain the 2 tones of colour that I've got there. I'm just making sure that I've covered everything, and then I'm going to let it all dry before I return. I'm just going to dot a bit more down the central vein here. As it starts drying, I am able to add a little bit more where I want it to be a bit more intense without it spreading quite as far as it did initially. So I'm really going down the central veins of each leaf and just adding in a little bit more Alizarin Crimson. And this area that I had skipped out a bit earlier has dried a little bit, even though there's still a bit of water pooling. I'm just going to add a little bit here. I really think this front-facing leaf is going to be my primary focus because it's the one that is closest to us, and I'll probably give it the most attention. Alright, I think I am going to stop here, otherwise I'm going to end up putting in way too much colour for my first layer. So let me let this dry completely now. That layer is completely dry now, so I'm ready to proceed with the next layer. In this layer I'm going to be a little bit more discerning in that I'm going to work on each leaf individually so that I can start getting some more contrast into the darker sections of each leaf. But before I do that, I'm just going to prepare 2 colors for this layer. That is more Alizarin Crimson, which I'm going to keep in a thickish consistency. And then for the shadow areas of each leaf, I'm going to use that Alizarin Crimson again, but I'm going to darken it with a little bit of Indigo. So here I'm just going to pick up a little bit of Indigo and darken this. And that will make a nice shadow color. So using my number 4 brush, I'm going to work leaf by leaf. I'll start on this top one, so I'm going to wet this area, avoid the smaller leaf as well as the adjacent leaf. I prefer to use cold press paper for my botanical sketching, but because it stays wet for longer and the colors blend and spread much easier. But the downside of cold press paper is, as you can see, you can't always stop where the water ends because of the textured nature of the paper. It can sometimes go a little bit out of the lines. I'll try and rectify that in additional layers, and that they might get blocked out by the colors that I put down in additional layers, but I'm also not going to stress too much about it if it goes a little bit out of the lines. Alright, now that that's wet, I'm going to pick up the Alizarin Crimson first and kind of go over the same areas that I did the darker tones in the previous layer, but just now trying to darken the central veins a little bit more, and then I'm going to add in some shadow around this edge here where the top leaf casts a shadow on the bottom one. It's quite wet. I do think that the color will spread quite a bit as I drop it down. I'm going to do the veins later. Let me start with the shadow edge first because I don't mind if the color blends there. I have got a Facebook group that I would love for you to join. Its name is christinemclarenart. This is a space where members like you can upload and share pictures of your completed tutorials. I love to see the finished tutorials of all of my followers. So if you complete this tutorial, please post a picture in my Facebook group for me to see. Facebook is a bit confusing, but I also have a Facebook page. This is the place where I share links to my videos. So just to be safe, why not go ahead and like and join both the Facebook page and group. Then you won't miss a thing, and I will be able to see your finished artworks. I'm just going to rinse off my brush and encourage a bit more blending. Now I'll pick up that thicker consistency Alizarin Crimson again and go down the veins. I don't want it to spread too far. I want to retain those light highlights in the middle of the vein segments that I created in the first layer, because that's what will make it look like there's a curve to each individual segment, and also helps to build the range of contrast colors that we've got in the painting. And now I'm going to pick up this shadow color and put it right against the edge of the leaf here where the shadow color is the darkest. Every bit of support that my YouTube videos get help me to grow my channel. And supporting me doesn't have to cost you anything. If you are enjoying this video, please click the like button below. Let me know what you think in the comments, and also let me know the sorts of videos that you would like to see in the future. I would love to hear from you. Then I've gone and picked up my size 0 round brush here. I want to use this contrast color down the veins, but I don't want my brush to pick up too much pigment, otherwise it's going to spread too far. So that's why I'm going to use this size 0 brush, because it's got such a small brush load that it can carry. And then I'm going to put the color down the veins to just try and increase the contrast in that area. And because the paper is still a little bit wet, it is blending a little bit, which is exactly what I want. I don't want the line to be too sharp, but I like how the darker color is not spreading too far. I'm happy with that. So now I just mustn't work on any leaf immediately next to that one. So let me move down to this one here. In the photograph we can see this one is probably the lightest leaf on the whole painting. So I don't want to make this too dark, but I just do want to add some contrast to it. What I'm also going to do, I can see that there is a bit of bleeding here. There's no way I can lift that color. The color is too intense, but I'm going to see if I can maybe just incorporate it into, make this leaf slightly bigger. Gosh, that's fine. Alright, so here I'm going to pick up that Alizarin Crimson again. I'm going to drop in some darker color here at the center. I'm just watering down that color a little bit, it's a bit intense. And I'm just outlining the edge of that smaller leaf above. As soon as I do that, the lighter leaf comes towards us, and the one that's slightly darker moves away from us. But I still want to keep this leaf light, because this one I'm going to make darker to push it back, and I'm going to need a light dark contrast at this intersection here. So this area I really want to keep quite light so that I can exaggerate the shadow of the one below. I think this might be drying a little bit. I'm just going to put a little bit more water down the veins. And then I'm going to take this Alizarin Crimson and outline each of the veins. Because the paper's quite wet now, it's spreading quite far, but that's fine. I'll come with the contrast color once this is done. I'm just going to encourage some blending. Obviously I've put extra water down in some areas and not others here. That's fine. I'm just going to take a damp brush now, not wet, because I don't want it to blend too far. And just encourage the blending where it's not blending. Because the base of the paper underneath is not dry, it's not going to leave hard edges, and I'm going to have enough time to be able to do the blending that I'm looking to try and get here. But I'm just making sure that my brush is not wet, otherwise it will start causing cauliflower effect and blooming of the color on the page. So I'll rinse and then dab off my brush. Now I'm going to pick up that shadow color. I'm going to put some right here at the base of the leaf. I'm just going to extend it up into the central vein. Now I'm going to pick up that smaller brush and I'll do the veins. I'm just working really lightly with a light hand so that I don't put too much of this color down. I'm going to drop a bit more into the base here though, so I get some nice contrast at the bottom of the leaf and against this smaller one. Then I'm just going to blend this out a little. Right, I'm happy with that. Next I'm going to do this one. And I'm really just going to go through all of the leaves and do exactly the same process for all of them. If you are enjoying this tutorial and are gaining value from it, please consider making a small donation to me on my Buy Me a Coffee platform. As you can imagine, these tutorials take many hours of work to put together. I appreciate any and all donations as they help me to continue building this platform. going to do some work on the leaves now. I'll paint the leaves in at least 2 layers, maybe more, but I'll see how I go. But for now, I'm going to prepare 2 greens that are going to be the greens for my first layer. Those 2 colors are Serpentine Genuine and Sap Green. So I'm just preparing those 2 colors before I put the water layer down on the leaves. Like I did with the red leaves, I'm also going to work this section by section. I'm going to start with this leaf on the left-hand side and put some water down first. In fact, I'll work these first 2 leaves on the left-hand side together at the same time. If you haven't got Serpentine Genuine, it's not a very common color in many palettes, you can just get some Sap Green and maybe add some burnt umber or some hunter yellow or something to it just to make a slightly different green. So as I think about putting the green colors down on the leaves, the areas that I want to keep the brightest is going to be the areas of the veins. I'm going to do negative painting around the veins in an additional layer. So the vein area is the areas that I'm going to put the lighter Serpentine Genuine down. So it is these vein areas that I'm trying to keep the lightest and that I want the Serpentine Genuine to show through. But it doesn't actually matter if I cover the whole leaf in that color because I'm going to do a darker color over it in the next layer. So now I'm going to pick up the Sap Green and I'm going to drop this in the areas between the veins. I'm doing this to avoid the lightest areas but also to add a bit of contrast and a different color to the leaves. But like with the red leaves, we're wanting to work this layer really light. We want to be able to give ourselves room in additional layers to come in with darker colors without overworking the painting or making it look too heavy. So then I'm going to work these top 2 leaves together. So first I'll drop in a little bit of the Serpentine Genuine. And then once that's down, I will add a little bit of the Sap Green between the veins. Now before I work on this leaf on the right hand side, just so that my hand doesn't drop down into the wet paint, I'm just going to put a very light glaze of the Serpentine Genuine over the little balls in the center of the flower. I will come in an additional layer and discern more between what is going on here in the middle, but I'm just getting this light glaze down first before I carry on. Now I'm going to work on this leaf on the right hand side. I'm going to want to get a bit of a watery glaze down first, but I don't mind dipping into my palette for a bit more of the Serpentine Genuine because it's running out. And then wetting my brush and putting a very wet mix of this down on the leaf first. So now I will just work between the Serpentine Genuine and the Sap Green like I did with the previous leaves. But now before the center dries completely, I'm just going to get that Serpentine Genuine in a slightly thicker consistency and drop it around the underside of each of the balls just to get a little bit more contrast, but I will come and work on this more in an additional layer. This layer is very wet now. I'm going to let the whole thing dry entirely before I come and work on my next layer. My painting is completely dry now, and in order to illustrate the negative painting technique for you, I'm going to use these 2 smaller leaves on the left hand side. It's a smaller area and it's a little bit less intimidating to try a new technique like negative painting if this is something that is new to you. I'm going to mix up some very weak mixes of two greens that I'm going to use in this layer. The first is Undersea Green. If you don't have all of the colors that I'm using in my tutorials, I would like to encourage you to have a look at my video on my palette of 18 colors that I have in my studio. I'll put the link in the description box below, but this very comprehensive video shows you the full range of colors that you are able to mix from a smaller set of just, say, 18 colors. But that was Undersea Green, and now I'm mixing Perylene Green. Perylene Green is a much darker and bluer shade of green. So I'm working with these colors in a light consistency because I'm glazing one layer on top of the other here. So with my very watery mix of Undersea Green, I'm going to use it almost as just a guideline for my wet and wet technique. You can see the lines that I've drawn for the veins, and I don't want those pencil lines to show at the end. I'm going to use the Undersea Green to go right up to that first vein line as a base layer. So now with the negative painting, I want to move into the next segment, but I want to leave a gap between what I've just put down and where I'm going now. You can go down to a much smaller sized brush now for the detail work if you want to, just to make sure that you leave that gap between the section that we've just worked on and what we're putting down now. So repeating the process again, I'm going to take this color right down to my pencil line, and then I'm going to skip a section and work on the next section, leaving the vein line in between the two. Now that that base color is down, I'm going to move to the Perylene Green. I think this is still a little bit of a wet consistency. I'm going to just thicken up that Perylene Green a little bit, and then I'm going to drop it down into the areas that I've put the water down. Just getting some variation in the color on the page, and also putting a bit more of the Perylene Green closer to the flower because that's where it would cast a bit more shadow and be a little bit darker. And then I will stipple it as I go further towards the edge. And I'm just making sure at all times that I'm not touching the area that I excluded. That is going to be the lighter vein area. I'm happy with the variation of color as well as the texture that I've obtained here, so I'm going to leave that section at that. So now I'm going to work through the rest of the leaves bit by bit, doing exactly the same technique throughout. Although negative painting might be a new technique to you, it's quite a nice technique for beginners in that you can work in as few or as many sections as you want to at any time, and there's no time pressure with being concerned about whether something's going to dry before you get to finish it. Just work with one or two segments at a time and get them right and the color that you're wanting it to be before you carry on and do the next. If I can look back at the first section of leaf that is finished and it's starting to dry, that Perylene Green is drying quite a lot lighter because it was in such a watery consistency. I'd like to avoid doing another layer if I can, so I'm going to try and put a bit more Perylene Green down closer to the red leaf and see if I can get it to blend outwards. It is a little bit too dry. I can see it's not blending. I'm going to come back and see if I can help that to blend. But with that in mind, I'm just going to go back to the second leaf so that I don't have the same problem and drop some more Perylene Green down closer to the red leaf. I'm just going to dampen my brush and see if I can encourage some blending here. What I'm doing here is really not ideal. I should have just left it to dry and then come back in an additional layer and added a little bit extra. Doing what I'm doing now really does risk that I'm going to lift the color underneath when I'm putting some additional pigment on a layer that's already damp. That's why it would have been better just to let it dry and come back and add some in after it's dried. This area is still wet enough that I can drop some of the Perylene Green in close to the flower and it still blends outwards. I think this is more what I'm looking to try and achieve, where I'm getting quite a lot of dark contrast against the red leaf, but then blending outwards towards the edge of the leaf. I'm going to continue on and repeat the process for the rest of the leaf. There's two leaves here. I will work on the top one first. So there's a central vein here as well that we've got to be a little bit careful of. So I'll get to it when I get there. Let's start down here. I'm going to go against this vein line here. So I will go up against the central vein and then worry about it when I get to the other side. And I'll touch this one. And the same here. Alright, I'm just dropping in the Perylene here. What I think I'll do is I'll let that half dry, and just in case I come from the right, if I touch it, then colour from here will bleed into that side. So let's let it dry completely and we'll work with the two halves. Likewise here. So here I can work in this half and then I'll come down and work in the bottom half. And I'm just going to repeat exactly as I've been doing until now. Now this one is dry enough that I can go and work on the other half now. So this is where I'm going to need to be a little bit careful, because I'm going to want to skip not just the central vein but then the side ones as well. And the veins don't completely match up. They are slightly off center to each other. So let's see how we're going to deal with the first one. What I'll do here is, again, we'll work section by section. I'm going to aim for where I want the vein to start on the other side. Oh, I had some dirt on my brush, so now it's gone over where I wanted it to go. I'm going to skip the central vein and then come out the side. Maybe it'll be a bit clearer with the next one. Skip the central vein and then come out the side. I seem to have gone over my line there. At least the majority of this is going to be covered by a frame, so it doesn't really matter. Alright, so I'll try and get that better down here. Let me just do these ones first where there is no central vein, and then I'll talk again once we get to this area here. But for these few, it's going to be exactly the same procedure as we've done up until now. Alright, let's talk about the central vein now. So this vein is kind of matching up with this one for now, but then we can see that they do go off center from each other. So that's fine. I will do the inside of this one as I have been doing. Just skip that vein with negative painting. Then come and do the same up the central vein. And then come out the side. I'll do two at a time here. So the next one again, I'll do the same thing here. I'll go up to that vein line there and then just skip out the center. I don't quite know what I've done with my two lines here as far as where the veins should go, so I'm just going to make it up. And then the last little bit to do is the underside of that leaf. Now that one, because it's underneath, I want to do it quite a lot darker so it can distinguish between the one above. So I'm not even going to bother with the Undersea Green. I'm going to go straight into the Perylene Green, map out my veins, and then I'll take it from there. Then I'll just drop more in here, particularly at the junction, just so that it separates the edges of the two leaves from each other. Alright, I think I'm going to let this all dry before I work on the center of the flower, just so that I don't smudge anything. I'm going to work on the center of the flower now, and to do that I think I'm going to start first with my Serpentine Genuine. I might have to add a little bit because I want it in a slightly thicker consistency. I'm going to put it around the bottom of each little circular thing, just to separate them from each other. Then I'm just going to try and blend those edges a little bit. I could have done this wet on wet, but then I would have had less control about where the darker sections go, so that's why I did it wet on dry and rather chose to then do the blending whilst the colour that I had put down was still damp. Now what I'll do is I've got this Sap Green still in my palette, and with that in a thick consistency on my brush. I'm still using a size 0 brush, so it doesn't have a very heavy brush load as far as how much it can carry, which is great, but I'm going to put that around the very bottom. And I'll do the same sort of blending again. I will do a much darker shadow colour in the areas that are very dark in between, but that I will do in an additional layer. And then I'm going to take this much darker shadow colour that we had from earlier and just do a few little spots of it here and there at the top of each little ball. And then I'll just get that Perylene Green and just put a little spot of it near the bottom of each one. I'm just trying to increase that contrast from the darkest darks to the lightest lights on each little ball. And then again a little bit of blending. Right, I'll let that dry before I do the shadow colour on the inside. Now I'm going to work on the exciting but little bit scary part, and that is the background. And I'm going to do the Bokeh Effect on the background. I've got an entire video on how to do this effect, and I will link that video in the description box below. But I'm going to be doing the same thing here, but that one is just a bit more detailed on the process. What I've got here is a pack of circle stencils that I bought on Temu. They come in all various sized circles, but because this is a small sketch, I'm only going to use 2 of the sizes. And what I did with these, because I want to isolate the circles and I don't want my sponge to pick up adjacent circles, I have taped off so that it isolates just one of each of the circles of each size. Then I've got a magic eraser sponge here, which you can buy from any hardware store or online. And that is what I'm going to use to do the lifting. And the thing with the Bokeh Effect really is getting the water level correct on your paper. If it's too wet and you try to start lifting it, then it's going to make smudge marks. Tending more towards being almost dry when I do the lifting, and also to not have your sponge wet. I'm going to dip it in the water, and then you want to really squeeze all of the excess off the sponge. So I'm going to do that even now in advance. So I've wet it and I've wrung it off, and I'm going to leave it there. So I'm going to start by getting the background color down. I want it to be a lot lighter than the leaves, and so I'm going to work with just 2 colors, and that's going to be Serpentine Genuine and Sap Green. So let me just prepare those colors first. This is the Serpentine Genuine. I'm just getting a whole lot of it into the palette here. And then I'll get some Sap Green. I'm going to use my number 12 brush to get quite a lot of water down on the paper, and then I will use my smaller brush to cut in around the edge of the flower. So I really want to get it quite wet so that I've got some time to get my colors down, but I'm not going too close to the leaves at this stage. And you can practice this effect if you've never done it before and you're a little bit intimidated by it. It is easier than it looks, but it's just it's really just that practice of getting the water level right on your page for when you start lifting. So, and every brand of paper is going to be different. So I would say if you are unsure and you're doing it for the first time and you are concerned about making a mess on your painting, then give it a try somewhere else on some scrap paper of the same kind that you are busy using, just to get an idea of at what point you're looking to start doing the lifting. Alright, I'm just cutting around the edge. Okay, with my bigger brush, I'm going to dip into the Serpentine Genuine first and just dot it around the page. As I said, we're trying to keep this light. We don't want it to blend in with the leaves at all. This Serpentine Genuine is a granulating color. As you can see, even in the palette, it separates into the colors that it's made up of, which I think is ideal on a background. And with these granulating colors, the wetter the paper that you're putting it down on, the more it granulates. So it is ideal for a background like this. When you use it more concentrated, you see less of its granulation effects. You can see that the water is pooling in places on the paper where I've maybe put on a bit much. I'll try and pick up some with my brush. Otherwise I'm going to get uneven drying if it starts pooling there. Alright, let's go with the Sap Green now. Again, I'm just going to dot it around. As I mentioned earlier, I have launched my Patreon channel. You can join my Patreon for free and have access to all of my YouTube videos and reference sketches, photos and pictures there. You are under no obligation to become a paid Patreon member, but from time to time I will release some paid watercolor classes that you might find of interest. Joining my Patreon will keep you abreast of all of my classes, free and paid. I think I'm going to get my smaller brush and just trying to get closer to the edges of the leaf. I'm going to lift up some of the water here. So if I was to start doing bokeh effects at this point, it's really, you can see with how much water there is pooling on the surface. If I put my stencils down on this, the stencils would pick up water that is on the paper and things would really smudge. And the circles that I put down wouldn't stay nice and crisp. So I'm going to let this dry a little bit, maybe just a few minutes, but I want there to not be any active pooling on the surface and for the paper to have that more matte look to it, and so that it's well on its way to drying. So I've let this dry for a few minutes now, and whilst some of the areas are still a little bit damp, there are areas that have got quite a matte dryish look to them. And so, for example, this corner here is quite dry enough where I could start working. And so I'm going to start there because it's going to take some time. And I'll work around to the other sections as they start to dry. So let me take the bigger circle first. I'm going to start by doing a circle over here. Put it down at the area where you want to do the circle. And when you use your sponge, brush from the outside in so that if there is any moisture on the sponge, it doesn't get under the stencil and then get onto your paper. So I will hold the circle down with the sponge that I had wet and wrung off earlier. I will push towards the center and you can see it starts to lift the color, but I'm definitely trying to not get water underneath as I do it. It's lifted some of the color there, and I can get my tissue and just lift up anything else, any of the water if it's gone underneath the edge. You can also just wipe underneath each time in case there's any moisture on there. I'm going to now do one overlapping over here. You can even use your tissue then once you've done some of that to lift off any extra color. And then with the bokeh effect, you also want to do different degrees of lifting, that they don't go all quite as light as this. So in this corner here, let me aim for one where I don't lift quite as much. It's hardly lifting at all. I'm just going to rinse and squeeze out the sponge. Alright, now what I'll do is I'll get the smaller circle and do an overlap one here. Maybe I'll aim to lift more. See, I've got water going underneath there. There was too much water on that sponge. So I'll just rinse and completely squeeze off that sponge. Alright, let's do a single smaller circle. Let's do a single smaller circle over here. Maybe over here. So you can do as much or as little of this as you wish. That one I was going for slightly less lifting. And then let's do an overlap one and lift some more. Alright, I'm going to take the bigger one and do that here. See, I've still got water on the sponge. I just mustn't squeeze the sponge as I use it. Just brush with it, but don't squeeze it. I'll do a third one there so that they're not all just in twos, and change the direction somewhat. Alright, what next? Let's go down here. This one I'm going to make it go into the corner. And yeah, let's do one here. And I'll aim to do much lighter, lifting a lot more here. Let's do, I think I'll do two single small ones side by side here. I think I'm going to send one off these two. I'm going to go over here. I wonder if I can get a single big one in over here. Let me try. And I'll do one going off the edge. I've got water under my stencil there, I can see. And maybe I'll do one in this top corner. Just the edge like that. I think that might be enough. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to come back and work more on the center, as well as I think I'm going to deepen some of the shadows here. But let's let this dry first so that we don't upset the bokeh effect. Now that that's dry, I'm going to work on the central area a bit more. I'm going to do that darker shadow on the center, and for that I'm going to use Perylene Green. So I'm going to work with the Perylene Green with my small brush, with the paint in quite a thick consistency, so that it makes a nice deep shadow. So I'm going to work with each of the little balls one at a time, and working wet on dry, I'm going to put a bit of Perylene Green shadow underneath each of the balls. This will separate them and give us more of a contrast in this center area of the flower. Now I want to get a little bit bolder and braver with some of the shadow on the red leaves. You can see on the photograph that for some of the leaves that are set further back, there is quite a lot more shadow on those. The darker I make any shadow on the leaf, the further back it's going to push it away from us, and that is what we're wanting for some of those leaves that are further away. I also think that in other areas, like the center of this front-facing leaf, that I could get a bit bolder with the shadow down the center of that. So that is what I'm going to work on now, and for me to do that I'm going to have to mix up more of that shadow color that I made earlier, which was a mix of Alizarin Crimson and Indigo. I really want it in quite a thick consistency for the depth of the shadow that I'm going to be going for now. So I'm making sure that it has got quite a creamy consistency and isn't very watery as I mix it. So that's the Alizarin Crimson, and now I'm going to add some Indigo. I think that's gone a little bit too purple, so let me add some more Alizarin Crimson. Alright, I'm happy with that. So first things first, my brush is still heavily loaded with that pigment color that I've just mixed. So I'm going to put that straight onto this little triangle area that is in deep contrast. Now I'm going to move over and work on this leaf. I want to leave this brush heavily loaded with the pigment color, so I'm just going to find a brush of a similar size to use for the water. So in order to increase my contrast here, I'm going to put water down in the areas that I want to add the shadow color to first, and then I'll drop that shadow color in a thick consistency. See if that's going to be good enough. Alright, so with this loaded brush, I'm going to drop this in. I'm even going to add a bit more here. And with my small brush. Alright, so with this smaller brush, I'm going to start in this top one here. I want to do this area a little bit darker. Maybe on this little one, I'll just do the central vein lightly. Likewise here. Alright, I'm going to intensify the shadow under here. So I'll just put some water down. And it's such a small area, I'm using the detail brush to do that. Alright, I'm going to do more under this edge. And I'm going to go as far as this central vein. Alright, let me just do a little bit of blending here. With my detail brush, I'm just going to add a central vein on that one and just brush it down the center here. Alright, now on this one, I want to add a bit more along this edge. And then I'm just going to blend it out a little bit so the whole thing is not too dark. Alright, so as I said, I want to look at this one in a bit. I want to put some more shadow in here and up the central vein. Right, let's see how we go. can see there's a bit too much water there. I'm just going to wait a bit before I do that vein. And then on this leaf here, I think I want to just do some shadow underneath there. And I think this additional contrast has really improved things. I think I just want to blend a little bit here. I'm just brushing over. My brush is almost completely dry of the shadow pigment, but with the little bit that remains on it, I'm just adding a bit more detail to some of these veins. And then I think, let me just put a little bit inside here. And then I'll just add a central vein here. And to this one. Alright, I'm going to let that dry and then decide. And there's the final sketch. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit the like button. Until next time, bye for now.